Anwar Sadat, the sixth president of Egypt, is a figure whose legacy resonates deeply within the Middle East and beyond. His presidency, marked by significant milestones and controversial decisions, is not only remembered for the peace he sought to achieve, but also for the shocking manner in which his life ended. But before delving into the heart-wrenching events surrounding his assassination, it is important to understand the extraordinary rise of Sadat himself. From a young boy growing up in a poor Egyptian village to becoming one of the most influential political figures of the 20th century. Born on December 25, 1918, in Mit Abu el-Qom, a small village located in the Manufia Governorate of Egypt, Sadat's early life was shaped by poverty and the harsh realities of British colonial rule over Egypt. He was one of 15 children in his family, and growing up in such conditions in a colonized nation left an indelible mark on Sadat. His exposure to the suffering of his fellow countrymen planted the seeds of nationalism in his heart. Sadat's early experiences with colonial oppression fueled his deep desire to see Egypt free from foreign rule. As a young boy, Sadat was greatly influenced by two men whose actions would later inspire him throughout his life. The first was Zahran, a local villager and hero in the eyes of many Egyptians, who was hanged by the British for his role in a protest against the colonial authorities. Zahran's martyrdom, as he fought against British oppression, made a lasting impact on Sadat. This act of defiance and bravery became a symbol of resistance for the young Sadat, a spark that ignited his own passion for political change. The second figure that influenced Sadat was Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern-day Turkey. Ataturk had led a successful campaign against the Ottoman Empire, overthrew the remnants of its rule, and established a new, secular and modern state in Turkey. Ataturk's reforms, particularly in modernizing the country's military and civil services, served as an inspiration to Sadat. He saw in Ataturk the kind of revolutionary leader that Egypt needed to follow in order to throw off colonial rule and build a modern, self-determined nation. By the time Sadat turned 18, Egypt was on the verge of significant change. The British colonial forces had long controlled the country, and the Egyptian people were growing increasingly resentful of this foreign domination. The year 1936 marked a pivotal moment in Sadat's life when the British agreed to open Egypt's first military academy to young Egyptians, regardless of their social class. Before this time, only the elites had access to military training, but now even people like Sadat, from humble backgrounds, had the opportunity to rise in Egypt's military ranks. This democratization of military training would prove to be a key factor in Sadat's rise to prominence. While in the military, Sadat met Gamal Abdel Nasser, a fellow officer who would become a close friend and ultimately a political ally. Nasser shared Sadat's vision of a modern, independent Egypt free from foreign influence. Together, they would later form the Free Officers Movement, a group of military officers who were determined to overthrow Egypt's monarchy and end the British occupation. By the time of World War II, Sadat had already become involved in revolutionary politics. He even went as far as collaborating with Nazi Germany, hoping that the Axis powers might help Egypt gain independence from Britain. During this period, Sadat engaged in espionage, working covertly to undermine British military positions in Egypt. His actions, however, would lead to his arrest and imprisonment by the British, further solidifying his status as a committed revolutionary. After spending time in prison, Sadat's political ambitions did not wane. He was determined to continue his fight for Egypt's freedom. In the years that followed, Sadat joined forces with the Free Officers Movement. Under the leadership of Nasser, this movement gained strength and, on July 23, 1952, the Free Officers staged a coup d'etat that overthrew King Farouk III. The revolution resulted in the establishment of the Arab Republic of Egypt and the end of centuries of monarchical rule. This event marked the beginning of a new political era for Egypt. Sadat's role in the revolution was significant. He was responsible for announcing the success of the coup to the Egyptian people, broadcasting a message of national renewal. At this point, he was still a relatively low-profile figure within the revolutionary group, but his involvement in the overthrow of the monarchy earned him political credibility. Over the next few years, Sadat became a more prominent figure in Egypt's government. His rise through the ranks continued, and he was appointed vice president under Gamal Abdel Nasser in the early 1960s. Despite his growing prominence, Sadat was often viewed as a somewhat passive and distant figure in the inner circle of Egypt's leadership. He was frequently underestimated, both by his allies and his enemies. However, this very underestimation would later work to his advantage, enabling him to execute some of the most unexpected and bold political moves in Egypt's modern history. When Nasser passed away unexpectedly in September 1970, Sadat was thrust into the presidency. Many believed that Sadat would be a transitional figure with little political will of his own. They expected his tenure to be brief and inconsequential. But Sadat surprised everyone. He quickly set about consolidating his power within Egypt's government, expelling Soviet-backed elements from the regime, and making strategic moves that would reshape both Egypt's domestic policies and foreign relations. He launched his corrective revolution in 1971, eliminating rival factions within the government and reinforcing his control over Egypt's political apparatus. This action, while seen by many as an assertion of his authority, also marked a turning point in his presidency. From this point forward, Sadat would take Egypt in a bold new direction. As Anwar Sadat took office as the president of Egypt in October 1970, he was faced with a series of challenges. The country was deeply mired in economic difficulties, political turmoil, and ongoing conflicts with Israel. Egypt's relationship with Israel had been strained for decades, particularly after the humiliating defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967. The Sinai Peninsula, which had once belonged to Egypt, was under Israeli occupation, and the country had been trapped in a state of no war, no peace with its neighbor. To make matters worse, Egypt had been heavily dependent on Soviet support, which, over time, had led to tensions and a sense of frustration within the country. Sadat knew that the situation could not remain unchanged if Egypt was to thrive and recover. His decision to pursue peace with Israel would prove to be one of the most significant and controversial moves in his presidency. Sadat's approach to the Middle East conflict was revolutionary. Recognizing that Egypt's repeated military failures against Israel had left the country in a diplomatic deadlock, Sadat realized that a new strategy was necessary, one that broke the cycle of warfare and sought a path toward peace. He believed that the only way to reclaim Egypt's lost territory and restore national pride was to shift the focus from military confrontation to diplomatic negotiation. This was a daring gamble, as the majority of the Arab world, including many Egyptians, believed that only military action could end Israel's occupation of Arab lands. Sadat, however, understood that a new reality had to be created, and this would require unprecedented measures. In order to break the diplomatic stalemate, Sadat made the bold decision to take matters into his own hands. In November 1977, he made a historic announcement that shocked the world. He was willing to visit Israel to seek peace. This was an unimaginable step at the time. No Arab leader had ever visited Israel, and to do so was considered a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. Yet Sadat was resolute in his belief that direct dialogue with Israel could lead to a lasting peace, and that Egypt's future depended on it. On November 19, 1977, Sadat arrived in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, to deliver a message of peace. His visit was both groundbreaking and controversial, as it marked the first time an Arab leader had publicly reached out to Israel. The visit was met with mixed reactions. In Israel, Sadat's gesture was initially received with skepticism, but it also sparked hope for a new era of peace in the region. In the Arab world, however, the visit was condemned. Many saw it as a betrayal, a step toward normalization with Israel that disregarded the Palestinian struggle. Sadat's address to the Israeli Knesset, parliament, was a pivotal moment in the peace process. In his speech, he expressed Egypt's desire for a just peace that would involve the return of the Sinai Peninsula, which had been occupied by Israel since the Six-Day War. He made it clear that Egypt was not seeking revenge, but wanted a future of peace and cooperation. Sadat's vision was clear. He was willing to make concessions for peace, but in return, he sought Israel's recognition of Egypt's sovereignty and the return of its territory. The visit to Israel sparked a series of diplomatic efforts that culminated in the Camp David Accords of 1978. Sadat's visit, although controversial, laid the groundwork for these talks, which would go on to change the course of history. The United States, under President Jimmy Carter, played a crucial role in mediating the peace talks between Egypt and Israel. Carter's involvement was instrumental in pushing both sides to the negotiating table and encouraging them to make difficult compromises. The Camp David Accords were a groundbreaking achievement. The agreement consisted of two main parts. The first called for a framework for peace between Egypt and Israel, which included the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Sinai Peninsula and the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. The second part addressed the Palestinian issue, outlining a framework for autonomy in the West Bank and Gaza. While the second part was less detailed and did not lead to an immediate resolution of the Palestinian problem, it was an important step toward addressing the broader Middle East conflict. The signing of the Camp David Accords in September 1978 marked a new chapter in Middle Eastern diplomacy. For Sadat, the agreement represented the fulfillment of a long-held dream of peace and the reclamation of Egypt's lost territory. For Israel, the peace agreement with Egypt was a significant breakthrough. It was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country and helped to shift the dynamics of the region. Sadat's decision to pursue peace, however, came at a heavy cost. Anwar Sadat's courageous pursuit of peace with Israel, though celebrated internationally, sparked widespread opposition at home and across the Arab world. The signing of the Camp David Accords and the subsequent peace treaty with Israel in 1979 led to Egypt's isolation from much of the Arab world, where many viewed Sadat's actions as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. Despite the global recognition of his efforts, which included the Nobel Peace Prize awarded jointly to Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin in 1978, his policies faced severe domestic backlash. Sadat's bold moves would ultimately lead to his tragic and brutal assassination. While Sadat was lauded abroad for his bold diplomacy, the peace treaty with Israel left him vulnerable to extreme criticism from within his own country. Radical Islamist groups, particularly those in the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, saw his engagement with Israel as a violation of Islamic principles and an abandonment of the broader Arab cause. These groups, which had been growing in influence, opposed Sadat's secular policies and his attempt to modernize Egypt by opening the country's economy to Western investment. They viewed his diplomatic outreach to Israel as an unforgivable sin, accusing him of betraying the Muslim world. Sadat's decision to engage with Israel did not just alienate radical Islamist groups. It also led to a breakdown in relations with many of Egypt's traditional allies in the Arab world. 17 Arab nations severed diplomatic ties with Egypt, and Egypt's membership in the Arab League was suspended. The League's headquarters, which had been in Cairo for decades, was moved to Tunis as a direct response to Sadat's actions. This diplomatic isolation only intensified the internal opposition he faced, and Sadat's position became increasingly precarious. Domestically, the situation grew worse. Despite his promises of economic miracles through his infitah, opening policy, which sought to liberalize Egypt's economy and attract foreign investment, the benefits were slow to materialize. The gap between the rich and the poor widened, and many Egyptians, especially the poor and middle class, felt alienated by the changes. Inflation continued to rise, and the economic struggles worsened for much of the population. These economic difficulties, coupled with his unpopular foreign policy decisions, led to growing discontent. As the economic situation worsened, Sadat responded with increasing authoritarianism. In September 1981, just weeks before his assassination, he launched a sweeping crackdown on dissent. This series of arrests, known as the September Arrests, targeted political opponents, intellectuals, journalists, and members of both the Muslim Brotherhood and left-wing groups. The move was widely criticized as a final attempt to silence those who opposed his policies. In total, over 1,000 people were arrested, and many were sent to prison or placed under house arrest. Sadat's response to internal dissent was not just political, it also became highly personal. He had long been perceived as a somewhat distant and aloof figure, and his growing authoritarianism only increased his unpopularity. The crackdown, which included the exile of Coptic Pope Shenouda III, further alienated the public. The crackdown was seen by many as a betrayal of the revolution's ideals and a desperate attempt to cling to power. The mood in Egypt grew increasingly tense, and many feared that violence was on the horizon. On the morning of October 6, 1981, the stage was set for a dramatic and tragic event: the annual military parade in Cairo, which commemorated Egypt's crossing of the Suez Canal during the Yom Kippur War of 1973, was scheduled to take place. This parade, which was often used by Sadat to celebrate Egypt's military achievements, would be the backdrop for his assassination. Despite the heavy security surrounding the event, there was a critical vulnerability that would soon be exploited. As the parade progressed, a military truck carrying artillery approached the reviewing stand, where Sadat and other high-ranking officials were seated. The truck had been diverted from its normal route, and the four men who would carry out the assassination had carefully planned their actions. Lieutenant Khalid al-Islambouli, a member of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led the group. As the truck came to a halt, al-Islambouli and his companions leapt from the vehicle and began their attack. Sadat, initially confused and thinking they were part of the military display, stood up to greet them. At that moment, al-Islambouli threw 3 hand grenades, one of which exploded while the others failed to detonate. The assassins then opened fire with automatic rifles, shooting Sadat and those around him. The attack was swift and brutal. Sadat was hit by 4 bullets, and although he was rushed to a military hospital, he succumbed to his wounds nearly 2 hours later. In total, 11 people were killed in the attack, including Major General Hassan Alam, and 28 others were wounded, including Sadat's vice president, Hosni Mubarak. The assassination was carried out by the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, a radical Islamist group that viewed Sadat as a traitor to the Muslim world. His assassination was not just a political act, it was the culmination of years of rising ideological tension, economic frustration, and disillusionment with his leadership. Sadat's death sent shockwaves throughout Egypt and the world. The country was plunged into a period of uncertainty, but the transition of power to his vice president, Hosni Mubarak, was smooth. Mubarak was sworn in as president just days after Sadat's death, and he quickly took steps to stabilize the country. Despite Sadat's controversial policies, his assassination ultimately did not lead to widespread unrest, and Mubarak's rule would continue for nearly 3 decades. The assassination of Anwar Sadat had far-reaching consequences, not just for Egypt, but for the entire Middle East. While Sadat's peace treaty with Israel survived, It was a difficult legacy for Egypt to bear. The assassination itself demonstrated the deep divisions within Egyptian society and the broader Arab world. Sadat's death also highlighted the challenges of balancing domestic politics, regional diplomacy, and international relations. His tragic end, caused by his bold pursuit of peace, would shape Egypt's future for years to come. Sadat's assassination serves as a powerful reminder of the high cost of visionary leadership. Despite the numerous challenges and criticism he faced, Sadat's quest for peace ultimately altered the trajectory of the Middle East. Though his life ended violently, his actions laid the groundwork for future peace agreements and diplomatic relations in the region. His legacy remains a complex and controversial one, but it is undeniable that his courage to pursue peace, even at the risk of his own life, forever changed the political landscape of the Arab world.